Running better minus the vacuum. It's a wet, stormy day here at the shop. Today we're dealing with exhaust gas recirculator valves. Now I'm not replacing this unit with a new one because my auto parts supplier wants about $150 for a new one. So what happened here is that I ended up developing a small vacuum leak that over time turned out to be a real big one. Every mile she just kept getting louder and louder, and it actually started to hurt your ears while you were driving the vehicle. So anyway, I ran a stethoscope, sprayed some brake clean in around this area, started to see some bubbles here near the intake, valve cover. Well, I knew it wasn't the valve cover that was leaking, so it only had to be the one other option. That would have been the EGR valve. So the EGR valve, if you have one of these fancy little books, it'll tell you exactly what it does. Basically, if you read all of this, it's very in-depth. This is just a Haynes repair manual. A lot of people hate them. Chilton usually is the best when it comes to stuff like this. But it does give you a little bit of in-depth coverage on what certain parts usually do if you're not really familiar with it. It'll tell you about NOx gases and how it, contributes to blah 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 on Earth, and all that stuff is boring, right? You don't care about that. You just want your car to run properly. Well, basically, an EGR valve is simply put just for emissions. So basically what the valve does is it just recirculates a little bit of spent exhaust energy and rams it back through the combustion process, and who cares? The vacuum leak is what you're concerned about. You want to make sure your car is running. So if this valve is not functioning the way it should, it can cause performance issues. One way to test the valve, you remove it from the vehicle. You'll notice that there's a diaphragm in here. You kind of take your two fingers and you kind of just push down, and we can take note that this valve actually moves very easily. So now I have some engine clean over here in a bucket. Now I'm not saying you should technically submerge the whole thing in engine clean. This stuff here is by Red Stallion. It is very good stuff. The Red Stallion engine cleaner will actually start taking paint off or finishes off certain things. If you take note, I cleaned this carburetor here. Look at how clean this is. I mean, that carburetor looks like it's a brand new, remanufactured, refurbished unit. No, that's the original carburetor that came with the car. No carburetor cleaner will make that carb that clean. So anyway, this EGR valve, it does move freely, but I don't want the diaphragm to be submerged in my solution of good stuff. So I'm going to take the EGR, and I want to get this carbon soot and deposits off, so I'm going to just soak it like this. I don't want the diaphragm submerged. I have a little brush here too, which I'm going to use to clean up the mating surfaces on the intake manifold, because this here, we got to get rid of all that. Actually, here's the remnants of the old gasket. We can tell that this gasket was pretty well pooched. The gasket would have went like this, and the leak was coming from this end, which is actually quite bizarre. I would have said it would have been coming from over here, because this gasket here is pretty well had the biscuit. Now if you want, the gasket was only $3, so I decided to opt out and cheap out, because I wanted to do a trial and error stage with this. I wanted to make sure that the gasket was going to work, the new one, and that the EGR valve was going to be okay. If the EGR valve tested that it was going to be okay, which I think it is just by testing it, by squeezing on the diaphragm, I wanted to make sure that a $3 fix is going to do it rather than a $160 fix. So basically I just kind of wanted to test the waters, make sure that the gasket was going to work. If the gasket didn't work, then I'm out $3. Who cares? The gasket wouldn't be on there long enough. I probably could have salvaged the gasket that I just bought and either kept it for another rainy day, kind of like today, or, anyway. So I decided I just want to test this new gasket theory, and if the EGR valve tests that it is actually completely done and the engine does not have any better performance, well then I blew $3, but it's better than blowing $150 on a part that I might not need, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. So I'm just going to take some solvent. I'm going to take a small little pry bar. I'm going to try and clean up the mating surfaces here without, gouging anything here. I'm going to stick a rag in the holes here because I don't want any soot and sediment to pass by through there. So in order to remove one of these too quickly, 13 mil wrench for most of these vehicles. This is an Oldsmobile V8. I think the small block Chevs were on the opposite side, if I'm not mistaken. I don't change these on a daily basis because normally they don't give you a problem. But a 13 wrench and a 13 swivel, universal, will actually get in there on the opposite side in order to get the job complete. So I'm going to go ahead and start cleaning this up. It's only took about 3 minutes to take the EGR valve out, and well, it'll take about that to clean it up, and about 3 minutes to clean it up, and another 3 minutes to put it back in. So it's a very straightforward repair. If you guys are in the great white Canadian North like I am, you guys probably are familiar with the Red Stallion and its product line, or maybe you're not. For those of you in the States, you guys probably have something too that's really good automotive products. But what this is just engine cleaner, and you can use it as parts cleaner too. But anyway, like I'm just taking a paintbrush here, and I'm just gonna kind of soak this in. And if you just use a paintbrush and you go over your gasket surface here a few times, this will look brand new. If we can kind of take note here, like it's even starting to polish the surface here. Like, I mean, it's fantastic. For really hard baked on stuff, you might want to let it sit for a little bit. You take some out of your can, for example, and just kind of like drip it on the area where you want to have it cleaned, and just let it sit and basically wipe it off, and your surfaces will be spotless. Something to ponder. Alright, so I am getting there with the Red Stallion parts and engine cleaner. You can still see, this is smooth enough, and all the old material is pretty well off there that you could put it back together, put a gasket in there, and just bolt everything down. But you know what? That's not clean enough for this cat. It's getting there. It would work if you did put it back together with all that on there, but I wouldn't sleep well at night knowing that I only did a half-assed job. You know what I mean? Would you sleep well at night knowing that your wife was sleeping with another man? Well, there you go. Okay, so you're going to want to do the same to the EGR valve itself if you're using a used one, or the one that was on the vehicle. If you have some very mild steel wool, that'll help, for sure clean up the surfaces a little faster. If you do have some around, just make sure it's very fine. You don't want to use too coarse of stuff. So like I say, to test the valve, you can just take your 2 fingers, push down on the diaphragm, and if the valve moves freely, then the valve should be fine. But you know what I mean, like if the valve is if you can't push on the diaphragm at all, then your valve is toast and you're gonna have to get a new one. These usually do cause problems when it comes to idling, so and even mid-range performance. So if you have a bad EGR, that's something for you to take a look at for sure. Rock Auto sells these for about $30. Plus, your shipping is also going to have to, you pay a little more for that. But like I say, like this was a $150 part for me, Canadian, from where I was. So I mean, I didn't really want to pay that all in one crack. So I ended up just purchasing a new gasket. And you guys can try this too, because for just the sake of trying it, it might save you some money in the long run, or it might not, or you might end up losing out on $3. But I think you guys can sleep at night knowing that you guys blew $3 rather than $150 on something that might not even need to be replaced. So something to consider. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and install the unit now. Our surfaces are all cleaned up. I'm going to take a few more minutes just to clean up this a little better, but it is pretty good. It feels smooth. All the little bits of rust and old gasket are removed. So you want to do this as with any other gasket surface. You know, you have to get the old stuff off. You know, so standard techniques apply. If you have a gasket scraper, you know, that'll help. A little bit of engine clean just to clean up a little bit also, and you're good from there. Alright, so pretty straightforward stuff. The bolts I also soak in there as well, because that cleaner really cleans up everything very nicely. So I ended up putting those in there as well. So I'm just going to sit the gasket down on top of the intake manifold, and then I'm going to go ahead and hand thread my fasteners just to start things off, and I'll go ahead and tighten them down. Alright, so I've got my fasteners all cleaned up. I just wire wheeled them a little bit. There was a bit of carbon on the threads, so I just wanted to get rid of it. And okay, these bolts are two different sizes. Well, that's interesting. So the thinner one goes here, obviously, and the wider one obviously goes on the opposite side. The heads are the same size, 13 millimeter. So very straightforward. I mean, there is nothing to this. You could, you know, zing through this fairly fast if you needed to. I mean, most garages wouldn't even bother to replace just the gasket. They probably would just recommend you know, replacing the whole EGR valve. As well, a mechanic, you know, they're not going to want to take something off of a vehicle and then have to put it back on just to remove it again in case, you know, the component is absolutely shot. So, but I mean, for a do-it-yourselfer, I mean, you might as well just, you know, if you have the time, you might as well. If you feel that, you know, money isn't a problem with you and you'd rather just swap it out with a new one, I mean, that's fine too. There's absolutely no shame in doing that. And if the unit does just so happen to have a real severe leak again, then and the valve still functions the way it should, then it's not necessarily the valve's function that is at fault. The casting is more than likely warped. I had that happen to me once, and I'm hoping that it isn't going to happen here today, that it was just in fact the gasket. The gasket is in fact a little bit chewed up here, so I'm pretty certain that it is the gasket that is to blame here. And if there is still a severe vacuum leak even after putting in a new gasket and EGR, then you could be looking at an intake leak. That also causes quite performance issues. It'll cause the engine to run lean. You might experience a heavy valve knock, lifter knock, all kinds of jazz like that. So anyway, but if you have the time and you don't really care about sitting in the garage on a Saturday afternoon, you know, farting around with something like this, then I say by all means grab yourself some wrenches, some cleaner. If you do have Red Stallion up where you are, their products are awesome. I mean, I recommend their stuff. Ever since I quit smoking, I can't, my tolerance level for any strong, harsh vapors, I can't take it anymore. Especially paint fumes and clear coat fumes is the worst for me. I can't take it anymore. I used to be able to handle strong odors like that, but harsh chemicals I can't deal with. And if you're the same way, if you're a pussy like I am, you know, that stuff there, it's a very low vapor. It doesn't, I mean, you could sit there in your basement and your wife wouldn't complain. So, you know, and if the kids have asthma or anything like that where they can't take the fumes either, well then you know, you sitting in the basement with that stuff, there won't be a problem. But I do recommend using that stuff in a high, well ventilated area, as does the manufacturer. So I'm just going to go ahead and tighten these up, and I'm going to go ahead and start and run the vehicle, and you guys should do the same. Alright, with the valve in place and the bolts snug, you can install your vacuum hose. I don't recall a torque spec for this. If you're dealing with a cast iron EGR valve and you're bolting it to an aluminum intake, you know, obviously the torque specs are going to be just a little bit lower. But I don't recall what the actual torque is. Now, I mean, if you've been farting around with these vehicles for as long as I have, I mean, just snug them up to where you think is right and just leave it at that. You know, you don't have to really torque and force that on there by any means, but I mean, just snug it up real good. And then maybe after 75 miles of driving, 100 kilometers, just maybe, you know, check it, make sure that it hasn't spun loose on you. And basically that's that. So, you know, you can restow your air breather unit, run the vehicle, see how it runs for you. Heat riser. Now usually the engine will run fine when it's cold. Usually it'll run perfect. Actually, you can basically stick a wine glass on top of that air breather while it's cold and it'll run fine. Usually your rough idle will start after the engine is warmed up a bit, and that's when vacuum will start to be heard if there is in fact a problem with the EGR. But like I say, you guys might experience different performance issues, but it could still lead to the same component. Alright, we'll let the engine warm up and we'll test it out. Okay, I do believe the engine is running at the final step of the choke high idle. Yeah, the choke plate is still half low, so the idle has gone down. I don't hear any vacuum leaks as of yet. Like I say, your engine has to be completely warm before you'll really hear a good leak at the EGR. So far I don't hear anything, and the engine is still running fairly decent. So you'll have to let it run and warm up first. So far, so good, lads and lassies. I hear a bit of a hum, and I think it's coming from the alternator. If you have a stethoscope, you can use that. If your engine is running and if it isn't running properly, you can have an assistant kind of help keep it running by working the throttle inside the car. If you don't have a stethoscope, just use a chunk of 3/8 fuel hose or 5/16. It really doesn't matter. And just stick the hose here against the EGR, but don't stick if you have a really bad leak, don't stick your ear right directly over top of that. You'll know once you get your ear somewhat close to the vicinity of the end of the hose. Because if you have a severe leak and you stick this hose right against the leak and you stick your other end of your ear right against the hose, you could damage your hearing. Because it will echo through here and it'll be very loud. So just keep that in mind. So to test for leaks, you know, just stick point the hose over top of the EGR or the mating surface where the gasket is, and then just stick the hose over top. And you'll be able to hear it. Same with, you know, bearing noise or anything of that nature. You know, you'll be able to hear stuff. But I think we got this problem rectified. I think it was just the gasket, as was my assumption from the get-go. This engine seems to be running very nicely. That is at low idle, and seems very performance oriented now. So I'm going to go take this for a highway drive and we'll see how she really performs out on the roadway.